Alright, in this video we're going to deal with the event handlers for our buttons. Before we do that though, there are a couple style issues that we have with the list. So let's jump into playlist.scss again. And so let's look at the progress bar. I think, is that correct? Okay, the progress bar, I don't actually want the left and right to be 5. I actually think I want the left and right to be 0. That's just a minor difference there. And the next thing I want is when we hover over it, I don't want the image to... when we right-click, for example, I don't want that image to do its little thing when we right-click on the element and have it selected. I don't want that image to expand. It looks a little weird. And I also want to override that that background. That looks a little weird as well. Also, it looks like our context menu could have a higher z-index because it's conflicting with the progress bar. So let's do that first, actually. I'm going to scroll up here to our context menu, and I'm going to give him a z-index of 201. So that'll make him appear above the context menu. Next up, I want to get rid of that image thing when I hover over it. So to do that, I'm going to scroll to where we do the hovering, and I'm going to say li hover not dot selected. So adding that not selector there, which is a fairly recent selector. Now when we right click, we'll notice that the image no longer expands and the background stays consistent. And that has a much better look and feel to it, I believe. But anyway, with those little minor style things out of the way, let's go ahead and deal with the actual buttons of our context menu. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to open up the context menu. We're going to do something fun with this. So for our buttons, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in a reactive sort of way. I'm going to map the click events of these buttons to streams that represent the operation I want them to perform. So I'm going to say const set current item money equals observable from event no default on play button click, and then I'm going to say map to component. This is going to be fun. Map to component goes into, or empty goes into component, goes into this playlist set current source, component source. And then I'm going to say const delete item equals observable from event no default. And I'm going to do delete button click. Map goes into a function that returns a function that calls playlist dot remove source, or how about delete source, and pass in comp dot source. So this is really bizarre here. I'm mapping the from observable no default click to a function that returns a function. So it's a bit weird. Let's go ahead and for my delete one, I'm going to actually break this out a little bit. I'm going to say function. I'm going to break this out into normal function syntax. So I'm going to say function return function comp, and this is going to return this playlist delete source comp.source. So this is what the code would look like. What this would look like if I expanded it out with normal function closure syntax without using the arrow function. So I'm mapping and I'm returning a function that then returns an observable. Oh, so this should be delete source money. So obviously delete source money and set current source money don't exist yet. Also, we don't have a source getter property on our components yet. But ignoring that, this is a very interesting bit of syntax because the way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna say observable dot merge set current item delete item, and then I'm gonna say dot with latest from selected item, and then I'm going to say flat map on, and I'm going to capture the operation and the current item. I'm going to say this goes into invoke the operation on the current item, and then catch wrap it, and then do comp subscribe, passing in this, and then response, and then we do our standard response stuff. So I said, say if response and response.error, then alert response error message or unknown error. Otherwise, selected item subject next null, which will cause the selected item, the context menu to be hidden. We can go ahead and clear out all of those extraneous curlies. But the point is I'm doing something interesting, and this isn't maybe necessarily the way that you would go about doing this all the time, but I found that this particular pattern worked very well for this instance. I have two buttons, and they both basically are responsible for representing an operation that I want to perform on the currently selected item. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the click events from those operations, and I'm mapping it to a function that returns a function. So then when I get that function back, I grab the latest selected item by using withLatestFrom, which remember, withLatestFrom merges the latest value from another observable sequence into our current observable sequence in the form of an array, and then I flat map on those two values. So after I do withLatestFrom, my stream now has an item that is an array of two values. The first value is a function, op, which will be basically this function here that I have highlighted. And the second value is the currently selected item that was acquired through the selected item sequence. And then what I do is I invoke the function, the op function, which is this function right here, or this function right here, depending on which button was clicked. I invoke it with the current item, and then I expect it to return an observable sequence, so then I catch wrap it. So in case it throws an exception, I catch that error, and I wrap it in an envelope that I know how to subscribe to. And then I subscribe to it, and then I receive have my messages. So this makes it very simple to combine multiple buttons that might do different things into a very, very simple stream. That, again, might not look so simple, but the whole point of this series is to at least introduce you guys to this sort of syntax. The whole concept of mapping when we return a function that does something. We've already seen the example of that. What do you think, the whole op list, op add stuff we have in our stores? It's the exact same concept, but we're applying it to DOM events. And I think that's awesome. Anyway, let me go ahead and clean up this code a little bit. I do vastly prefer to use the arrow syntax for this. So empty goes into comp, goes into this playlist, delete item money, comp.source. Okay, let's go ahead and do our comp.sources. So that's going to be inside of our playlist list file. And if I scroll down here to our playlist item component, remember our playlist item component receives a source as a parameter for his constructor, then stores that into a local field. I'm going to add another getter. I'm going to say get source, return this underscore source. So now we can get the source out of that item. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and implement, in this video, let's implement setCurrentItem, because that's going to be fairly straightforward to implement. So the setCurrentItem, remember, it's going to, when we click on that, and again, you might want to take a look at this code a little bit more. When we click on that, it's going to invoke this playlist setCurrentSource. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to Control-C on setCurrentSource, and then I'm going to open up my playlist store. So that's going to be under Stores Playlist. And then down here, after add source, we'll have setCurrentSource source. And setCurrentSource source is simply going to defer into the server. So I'm simply going to say return this server emit action playlist set current. And I'm going to say ID is source.id. All right. So now I'm emitting the set current action, which I'm going to have to implement inside of my playlist module. So let's go ahead and in our server code, come down here to modules playlist, and on action, we'll say set current, or rather playlist set current, and he will receive an object that has an ID parameter. All right. And set current, what this is going to do is it's first going to make sure we're logged in. So I'm going to say if not is logged in, return fail. You must be logged in to do that. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say const source equals this dot get source by ID. If not source, return fail, cannot find source ID. Otherwise, this set current source. And that's it. That is our server-side code for setting the current source. So it's very, very straightforward. Our remove code is going to be a little bit more complicated than that. But let's see if it works. Let's hop over here, make sure our console is open, and I'm just going to right-click and say play, and we get an error. Oh, I do have to refresh because we changed our store. Remember, we can't do hot module replacement with stores. We can only do those with components. So let's right-click, set current source, and that's not even close to how you spell emit. Emit action money. Sorry about that, guys. So make sure you don't have any typos there. Let's refresh again, and log in, and say set course and set source, and check that out. If we saw the server, we would see that it's also saying this item has been set as the current item. Of course, if we try to delete, we'll get an error, but that's okay. All right. So again, just to recap the code so far, we have in our playlist store, we have a set current source method that simply emits that action. In our playlist module, our set current is just a handful of lines of code, just doing some basic validation and then invoking existing methods. And then our context menu currently looks like this. So I'll start up at the top and then scroll down. Oh, we can delete this ESLint disable. And that's it. So in the next video, we'll deal with deleting sources, and we'll see you guys then.